I've created 3 shows. They've all attracted major media partnerships. So with each of those, the kind of deal, the monetization, the partnership looked different each
Mhm.
time. Sometimes money was changed hands. Sometimes it was more about exposure. Sometimes there was revenue share. I do think that you're right in that there is a perception that there's some sort of curtain, some sort of,
Yeah. Who's
exclusive
the Wizard
club.
of Oz behind the curtain?
Right,
Absolutely.
right.
Absolutely. Welcome to PodBiz, the money behind the mic, where we get into the business of podcasting. I'm Norma Jean Belenke, a podcast and media strategist, specializing in marketing and audience development.
And I'm John Kiernan. I'm a podcast producer, and we're asking the question that's on everyone's mind. Where is the money in podcasting?
Each week, we talk to podcast industry professionals, marketers, and creators who are turning podcasts into a thriving business and making the industry what it is today.
With real revenue, real strategies, and real results.
If you're looking to grow or scale your show, and of course monetize, you're in the right place.
So let's get down to PodBiz.
Today we are joined by Dr. Michael Osborne, founder of 14th Street Studios and founder and host of the podcast Famous and Gravy. We'll be speaking about how he took 3 different shows from indie to industry, how he started his own production company, and how getting a PhD in environmental science at Stanford led him to podcasting. Let's get down to PodBiz. Michael, thanks for joining us here on today's show.
Norma, it's wonderful to be with you. Thank you for calling me Dr. Michael Osborne. Nobody calls me Dr. Osborne, but I appreciate it.
Well, we will get into how you became a doctor a little bit later in our episode today, but thank you so much for joining us. It's been such a pleasure. Let's get down to PodBiz. Let's just get straight into it. Michael Osborne of Famous and Gravy and 14th Street Studios. Where is the money in podcasting?
For me, the money has been in production and consulting. That, for the 15 years I've been working in this space, I try to make great shows, and I have been really lucky in that I've been able to make a living making podcasts for over 15 years now. So that's where the money's been for me.
But you've also, not to sell yourself short, you have taken an indie podcast and gotten deals with networks, like to be part of their networks, not like an ad deal, but like, hey, welcome, get up and get under that wing, like get up in there, join our club,
Yeah.
and podcasting, to be honest, and I really want to dive into this with you. Podcasting is a self-certifying industry in a lot of ways. There's a lot of independent creators out there, and you have taken several shows from indie to industry. So there's also money there. You do it for other people's ideas and shows, and you produce their shows, and you have 14th Street Studios, and we'll talk about that. But you also have this track record of taking shows from indie to industry, which is huge. And I think a lot of people create a podcast with that dream. And so tell us a little bit about that as well and what that monetization looked like.
Yeah, I love that you call it indie to industry. I didn't really have that language before you pointed it out to me. And I think it is, and I didn't realize it until recently, kind of a rare accomplishment. I've created 3 shows. They've all attracted major media partnerships. So, and with each of those, the kind of deal, the monetization, the partnership looked different each time. And, sometimes money was changed hands. Sometimes it was more about exposure. Sometimes there was revenue share. But I do think that you're right in that there is a perception that there's some sort of curtain, some sort of, exclusive
Who's the Wizard
club.
of Oz behind the curtain? Absolutely.
Right.
Absolutely. That's a really big one. And a lot of people feel like, oh gosh, I wasn't picked, or my show wasn't selected by a network, or, I've never had a show put my episodes behind, or a network put my episodes behind a paywall.
Right. Yeah, no, and I think that it has happened for me 3 times. I think in each time the industry was in a very different situation. So my first show I started in 2011. I ended up partnering with Smithsonian on that. That was an environmental show. That deal came about in 2015. My second show, Raw Data, was a tech show, and we partnered with PRX in 2019 on that one. And then Famous and Gravy, my most recent show, which is still going, partnered with Wondery. And, this was about a year before Wondery's unceremonious sort of whatever restructuring, which just whatever else has happened is Wondery. The fact that we brought a partner like that to the table, I think, is an accomplishment. Like I said, there was three very different environments, three very different contexts, three very different shows too. And as I have been in conversation with you and has been sort of reflecting on where I'm at in my career, I I have been able to do a little bit of pattern matching, and not. I mean, it's very easy to look at what was different in each of those instances, and my hope is that it's a little bit more revelatory to look at what was common in each of them, like what was the process that happened each time. And so I'm happy to
Yeah,
speak to that if that's interesting.
absolutely. I mean, I think it's also like, what's the secret sauce, right? I
Mm,
think a lot of people want to know that. But I think it's also something where, once you figure it out, you use it for yourself, right? And the
yeah.
shows you make. And then you also use it to create shows for clients. So yeah, tell us, what's the secret sauce?
Well, I mean, for me, it's always about originality. And do you have an original concept for a show? And I really think a useful prompt is, can you say this is the only show that fill in the blank, right? And so I am very big on trying to differentiate where I can, uh, and I think that whenever if you're a creator out there and you're asking, why isn't my show growing? The first question should be, what can I do better? What can I do to make my show better? I had a conversation with Tom Webster not too long ago where I was pushing on this question. Tom, how do you grow a show? Because, even when you land a partnership deal, you still want to grow it. I mean, I still want to grow it, everything I'm trying to do. I don't feel like I've reached the ceiling with my audience. And Tom said, I thought this was just so on spot. He said, think about what you are delivering for your audience and ask yourself, how can I do that even better? How can I
Mm,
bring more value? I really like the phrase value density, how much like value can I?
value density.
Yeah, I got that from Jeremy Enns, who I think is brilliant.
We
I,
love Jeremy. Yep, he's
Jeremy's
been on the
great.
show. Yep.
Yeah. Jeremy's the man. Yeah, I've heard it, especially with audio. I've heard people say that audio carries the most freight, the most kind of information per unit time, to be scientific about it. And value density is kind of what I mean by that is like when you read a book, it takes hours. When you watch a movie, it takes not that much time, but you don't get as much out of it. One thing that is so satisfying about great audio is how much you get based on the
Mm,
time commitment, right? That's what I mean by value density. And that's what I heard in
yeah.
Tom's answer. Like, how can I introduce even more? I don't whether it's social capital or learning or insight or humor. Like, how can I make the show as rich an experience as possible? Which again comes back to originality. For me, I break that up in kind of two parts. There's originality of concept and there's originality of personality and of host.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
And I think you've got to get those things to collaborate and work together.
Yeah.
I think a really great concept will bring out the best sides of a host, but that is a easier thing to say than to actually do.
Yeah, I think it's something where it's really about chemistry in terms of hosts,
Mm.
right? And sometimes that can be benefited by or augmented by a great producer. Like, most of the time on PodBiz, for instance, like you're seeing my face, but John a lot of the time is cueing me. He's making edits in the background. He's like, "Hey, this really worked. Hey, do more of this." And with my clients, right? Sometimes it's like, "Hey, the host needs to bring a little bit more personality, or this is a little bit cerebral. Maybe they can be a little bit more factual and direct in their tone." It's super important, I think, to have that chemistry. And I love what you said a couple of minutes ago about, this is the only podcast that does blank.
Yeah.
I think that it's really important to be original. It's super important to do your market research. This is what I talk to my clients about all the time. Like, please search to see if other podcasts have the name already. Search to see if anybody else has registered this copyright. Like, please, because
100%.
yeah, it's a super big deal. And I think it's creativity. James Cridland actually said this on my panel in London at the London Podcast Show. Creativity is the thing that, AI can't replicate at this stage.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And so I think it's important to be super clear on what a good idea is. And sometimes that lives in your head and you're like, hey, I'm on this train. It's leaving the station whether anybody else is on it or not. And sometimes you like take a poll with your friends or pop it on LinkedIn with your podcasting community and just be like, hey, does anybody like this idea? Like, I've also seen people test artwork that way, right? Like, hey, A or B, and so I think it is also good to get a community to get community feedback as well. But it's definitely something where, you've struck gold a couple of times. I think that having a show, and you've talked about this with me off camera, or off mic, that you had Famous and Gravy for like 3.5 years until, that Wondery deal came through. So it's not necessarily like, we're talking about it like you got, an industry deal, which is great and a huge, win for any industry podcast. And also, it wasn't overnight.
That's part of I'm so glad you pointed it out. That's one of the real patterns. Actually, that was true with all 3 of my shows, that the average time between launch and actually bringing a partner to the table was about 3.5 years. I think that speaks to a lot of things, right? I think it speaks to, sort of stubbornness and durability, like just like hanging in there. And there's a little bit of, arrogance, maybe believe in yourself. But I think that there's also an element of, that, and this is something I've really been thinking a lot about, that, prior to launch, you want to have a good concept in mind, but minimum viable product and partner worthy show are not the same thing. That a lot of, feedback and a lot of, reaction and improvement needs to happen after launch. And you need to keep working on it. As I've been reflecting on each of these partnerships, there is a gap between when the show launched and when a partnership came about 3.5 years. And I guess I read into that there's a difference between a minimum viable product, something that is, ready to go out into the world, and a show that's done, that's mature. Every great podcast, I think, goes on something of a learning journey. And one of the things that you want to have awareness of as a creator and as a host is that just because the thing is out and live in the world does not mean, the concept is finished. You can always improve and iterate on it. I want to respond to one other thing you said too. I love the way you talked about, your collaboration with John on PodBiz. I feel like that atomic relationship between host and producer is so huge that I have found, in my 15 years of working on this, that I can get into a real position of conflict if I am obsessed with the show and trying to reach an audience. That I think that it is very healthy to have a division of labor of somebody who is like paying attention to the idea and what's going on in the show and obsessing about the concept, and somebody who's there to offer step back advice and saying, this is working, this isn't. And bringing on collaborators for that kind of constructive feedback, I think it's absolutely fundamental for any great show. And that has been my experience. It's one of the things I love about working in podcasting is how collaborative it is. I like debating about what's working and what's not and why.
Yeah, absolutely. And, I think just to kind of go off of what you said, it's something where when you are looking at a very polished podcast, to be honest, they've done the work. And that work can be done by a lot of people at the front end with a lot of money.
Yeah.
Right? Or an improv, theater comedy group. Or, that work can be done over time. Right? You're going to refine your product over time, or you're going to refine your product with a marketing team that does market research, right? This is what I tell my clients all the time. Like, when you're talking about a branded podcast, you have to put it out and it's got to be really clean. It's got to be really cohesive and consistent. Your branding's got to look great and you've got to say the same message, right? But if you're an independent creator, you have time to shape your show, and it's okay to let yourself have that time. It's okay to hit the ground running. And of course, there are best practices, right? And I'm sure you implement them. I talk to my clients about this all the time, right? Like, please have your artwork to spec. Like, here are the best practices in terms of, the visuals, the metadata, all of that. And also, if you're one person and getting all of that together is stopping you from making the show, just make the show.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Like,
I've been working with this framework lately. It's a little bit corny, but there's a acronym I use. IDEAS is what it stands for. IDEAS: inspiration, deconstruction, experimentation, activation, solicitation. So I don't know if this is fun or not, but I'll run through it. Inspiration: what are you into? What are your own habits? What shows turn you on? Great art begins with mimicry. Can you steal ideas from good creators? Deconstruction, really looking at
yeah.
how a thing is working. What is it about a host personality, the structure of a segment, the storytelling, the design? Experimentation, try to apply those ideas to your own concept. See if you can
Mhm.
integrate them in. Activation is about prototyping and just giving it a go, to your point a minute ago. And then also to your point about audience research, solicitation, put it out there, figure out a way to hear how your thing is being experienced. It is impossible to be objective about our own shows. And we have to learn, even as independent creators, even on a shoestring budget, how to get signals from the audience about what is and is not working, and have some real humility that it's not done. Like, that is an ongoing iterative process.
It's an ongoing conversation. Your audience is consistently talking to you through the listener stats, right? Through the downloads,
Mhm.
through the any kind of click through your show notes, and on a lot of apps there's a lot of dialogue going on, right? And on whether you have a Substack or a Patreon or social media, like, you are consistently having a conversation with your audience.
Have I told you my
Um
favorite hack about this on Famous and Gravy?
no, please.
Oh, this is something that I really like to tell indie creators about. So every episode of Famous and Gravy begins with this like bluff the listener quiz. Basically,
Yeah, I love it.
I pull clues from the person's obituary. I give one clue at a time. The guest has to guess who this is, and then at the end of the segment, there's a reveal. Today, Anthony Bourdain. Today, Fred Rogers. Today, Maya Angelou. Whoever it may be, Bowie. What's happened is that the show is at a critical enough mass that there's a call to action. Hey, if you want to participate in the quiz, send us an email. We'll set up a recording. What
Mhm.
has happened is that has given me an opportunity to have one-on-one conversations with organic audience. So I'll record the segment, but then I'll say, hey, can you hang out for another 15, 20 minutes just to talk? And I'll ask questions like, so how did you find the show?
I
How do
love
you
that.
describe it to other people? What can we do better? Where do you listen to it? And I cannot tell you how much that has helped me to refine my theory of the audience. So my, kind of message for independent creators who are trying to do, audience research with no money to do it is develop a listener call-in segment. If you can
I
get
love
people
it.
on Zoom or on, a recording, you will learn more in those conversations about how people view your show than in my experience than any download numbers or any kind of social media impressions. The focus groups are where I get a lot of like psychology into
Yeah,
what
and
my
I
show's doing.
I think that's something where it's really valuable, and it's super important to build that in where you can. I love that segment of the show. So for everybody listening, Famous and Gravy is a show that really, it's beautiful. It's a beautiful show. It really
Oh,
it
say
it
more, say more.
showcases and highlights someone's life who's passed away more than a year ago.
Mm.
And there's all these different segments, right? Like what their net worth, and if they went to a dinner party with other people who passed away
Yeah,
who had the same net worth, who else would they be sitting at a table with?
yeah.
What their personal life was like, what they accomplished, reading an actual obituary from them, and then, coming up with your own three superlatives, all that kind of stuff. It's a really fun show. And I think that getting that listener feedback is really helpful. And the segment that you're talking about is at the very beginning of each episode. You don't know who the guest is, in the show title, in the episode
Right,
title.
right.
But the listener, if it was on a playlist or not a play, you wouldn't know. And
Yeah.
so, you hear this kind of like quiz of like, oh, who ran a children's TV show for 40 years on public television station. And then, after two or three guesses, it's like, oh, it's Mr. Rogers. And so
Yeah.
I think that it's something where, building in that segment and then getting that audience feedback on the back end, super, super genius.
I mean, well, thank you. And I stumbled into it. I mean, that was inspired by Wait, Don't Tell Me. They have a bluff
Yep.
listener segment, and it was inspired by Heavyweight. I love in Heavyweight the way he messes with Jackie at the top of every episode. That 30 seconds is often my favorite segment of the whole thing.
Famous and Gravy is just such a fun show. But how did you come up with the idea? Like we've talked about, it's really important to have an original idea.
Yeah.
It's really important to have a great host, and the hosting has changed on this show. So tell us a little bit about that and then how you created the show. And then we'll get into how you got into podcasting, because it also involves how you became Dr. Michael Osborne.
Yeah. Sure. So the Famous and Gravy started with my friend Amit Kapoor, who he was, on the show for the first 80 episodes. He's had to step back. So lately I've just been inviting guests on for the last 40, 50 episodes or so. And there's no falling out or anything like that. But it was just Amit and I in 2020 when we started dreaming up some idea. And essentially it was a COVID project, and I thought Amit was a smart guy who had talent, and I thought he needed to be on a podcast. So it began with a number of conversations. It was kind of an inside joke thing with us about dead celebrities. Anytime anybody would die, we would text each other. It wasn't even actually monitoring celebrity deaths. It was more, we play this game where we'd be like, is this person alive? Yes or no? Like Jimmy Carter, alive? Yes or no? You had to stop and think about it. Right.
Oh, no. Is it still a yes?
That's my point. I don't know. We could look it up, but that's exactly like what we do all the I mean, I remember in 2011, he'd be like, Shirley Temple. I'm like, surely she's dead. And she's not dead. Shirley Temple was still with us in 2011. So I was like, we should do something around this. And we began meeting weekly, and we did that for about a year online. We just pop on a Zoom and talk. There were two shows in particular that really inspired us. One was Rewatchables, the Ringer show hosted by Bill Simmons and some of the staff at the Ringer, where they rewatch an old movie and they answer the question, who won the movie? Which is not a real question. That is just a conversation driver. But that is
but every movie does have a winner.
Every movie kind of has a winner, right? And that evolved for us into, rather than being who won the movie, is because we're kind of interested in who won life. Would you want this life? That was the driving question for, and remains the driving question of Famous and Gravy. What is desirable? What is interesting? What is aspirational in ways that we may or may not have noticed? The other podcast that was a big source of inspiration was, at the time, You're Wrong About. I've since come to love If Books Could Heal. I have a kind of fascination with Michael Hobbs. I don't think I'd ever want to meet Michael Hobbs in person, but I love Michael Hobbs' shows. I find them so like the energetic and snarky, and it's a kind of conversation I want to drop into. And I do think that Michael Hobbs is really innovative in ways that I'm not sure people talk about enough, that there are all of those podcasts, and I could describe them if people don't know them, but they're not, there's no interview tape. It's more like a designed conversation, but they all have a point. They have directionality. There's a way a story unfolds over the course of a conversation. And so essentially Famous and Gravy is Rewatchables meets You're Wrong About, but for dead celebrities. That's the sort of succinct version of it. We developed all those categories, and it all culminates in a debate about, would you want this life?
Absolutely. And it's a great show, but it's not your first. So, Michael, how did you get into podcasting, and how did you become Dr. Michael Osborne?
Yeah, so I am a refugee from academia. About 15 years ago, I was in the midst of a PhD program at Stanford. I was studying climate science, which is such a bummer. And it was like, climate is just depressing, right? And I had this kind of, I don't know, moment of desperation where I'm in year 4 of a PhD. And the thing about getting a PhD, especially in science, is you get to a place where there are like 5 or 10 people on planet Earth who can understand what the hell you're talking about at any given moment. Your like brain is so filled with like jargon and and very, very, very obscure information that I was just no fun at a party anymore. So I kept and I also discovered research science was not for me. So I ended up going by the Career Development Center at Stanford, and this woman there, this is way before Serial. This is early days of podcasting. She ended up saying, "You should start a podcast. You should try this out. More than anything, Michael, you need a creative outlet." And I'd been a podcast fan since 2005. I was a real
Wow.
early adopter of the medium.
Yeah.
At the time, I was really into WTF. This was sort of the first 100 episodes of Mark Maron's show, and he's such an acquired taste. At first, I didn't like that show, and then I came to love it. And he's one of my guys. He's a hero of mine, and so I essentially came up with a show that was sort of like WTF, except for climate science. And so I started the show when I was still in grad school. It found an audience. It kind of took off. And as soon as I finished the degree, and I did see that's how I became a doctor, like not the kind that can help people, but whatever. I got the letters. I got offered a job by Stanford, and I ended up spending about 5 years as an employee building out a podcast incubator for the university in the mid 20 teens, which is when I created my second show.
Absolutely. And you are not the first Stanford podcaster we've had on here at PodBiz. So shout out to Laura Joyce Davis from the Stanford Storytelling Project.
Yeah, Laura's the best. Yeah, I love Laura.
No, it's I never thought like I would know so many people specifically from Stanford who worked in podcasting.
Yeah, I wonder. I mean, it's not coincidental. There is maybe it is. I don't know. I'm not too rah Stanford, but I will say one thing that university does exceptionally well is support creativity and entrepreneurship. If you are somebody who's got an idea and they think it has traction, you will find people there who will help you to support and nurture that idea. That was absolutely my experience launching my two shows there. So, and there's a lot of, some of the students I worked with back in the day have gone on to have awesome careers in audio. So there's, a real talent pool there. And Laura is right at the center of that.
Yeah. And when you started that incubator, it was hard to learn audio. There weren't a lot of jobs. There wasn't a lot of education. We've had other guests on the show talk about this. Like, for all of our friends and listeners and podcast industry peers in the UK, you guys had BBC, right? We had NPR, but it wasn't the same. There weren't the same kind of programs. It wasn't as big. There wasn't so much of an up and coming fostering relationship to teach people how to have a career in audio.
Yeah.
And so it's so different how everybody came to be in podcasting, because we're still in that first generation of people who had other careers first or came about it in interesting ways. So that's a really important distinction, I think. And there are still, those folks who, have a public radio background in the US, of course, but it's a small club. And I think for a lot of people who are, self-made or started their own production companies, there is a bit of a feeling of like, oh, the public radio folks and the rest of us. So
let me speak to that real quick. I actually, I didn't mention this, between my finishing my PhD and getting hired by Stanford, I actually did have a summer where I was plucked out of the lab and dropped into KQED and worked as a science reporter as part of a fellowship. So I felt like, which I got some
so
training
you were
there.
One of those cool kids.
Kind of, but it was so brief, Norma, that I don't want to overstate what I learned.
I don't know. You get in the door, you get in the door. I have to say, even if you didn't have an opportunity to progress in that organization, you had an opportunity to be exposed.
I couldn't agree more. Yeah.
What big audio could do pre-podcasting, and very few people had that.
Yes, but I will say I totally agree with that. I feel like I got access to craft, that there is a institutional knowledge at the public broadcasting stations where they take for granted just how well they understand audio storytelling. And I guess this is kind of a theme of the whole indie to industry thing. I feel like I have been very, very fortunate to have been invited in for very brief periods of time to unlock some institutional knowledge. And that's kind of, where my career is. I feel like, yes, I can shine a little bit of light on how industry partners think about shows, what kind of questions they ask if they are interested in your show. I can also certainly speak to the psychology of independent creators who say, how do I get a show going and how do I attract that kind of attention and what does creative development look like? I mean, this is kind of podcasting. This is when they talk about the Wild West. There is institutional knowledge trapped behind closed doors here and there, but there's more freedom to break down those doors than we
Yeah,
sometimes think. And that's certainly like
absolutely.
my MO. Yeah.
I definitely think there's room to break down those doors, but I also think everybody in podcasting that I've met, or at least, 90%, 95% of people are collaborative. So
Yeah.
if you want to learn something, ask, right? If you want to do something, do it. And people will, appreciate the effort, to be honest. Like podcasting is a medium of, hey, you showed up, right? And it's a bunch of people that showed up and that love to talk. So.
And, Norma, 100%. Like I've thought about, gosh, what else could I do? How else could I make more money? You asked the question, where's the money in podcasting? I'm making
Yeah.
a living and I'm happy with, my income, but I'm not killing it and I'm not about to retire. Anytime I think about walking away from the podcast industry, I think about how unbelievably wonderful the culture is. I love the conferences. I love
Absolutely.
the creators. I love who I connect with. I find that I can connect with people who I would otherwise have tremendous disagreements with because we love the form and we love the format. It's
Yeah.
such a like awesome culture. So I could not agree more wholeheartedly.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, speaking of that, Michael, what would you say is one key metric or move or even a mindset that's made the biggest impact on your podcasting career and the success of your clients and 14th Street Studios?
I have this friend Steve who says every time I get vulnerable as a middle-aged man, he's like, "Are we going to have a wiener dog moment?" So I'm going to create a wiener dog moment. For me, it's
What is
about
a wiener dog moment?
he's just trying to break the ice and allow me to get a little bit vulnerable because for me, Norma, it is ultimately about self-love. That what I have found in this space and as a creator, when a show is not going the way I want, when people are not experiencing it, when the audience is not growing, I can come back to the message of I am doing something valuable that feeds my soul. I am
Mm,
nurturing my own curiosity. I'm connecting with people I would not otherwise connect with. I'm connecting with my intellect in a way that might not otherwise find its expression. And that is sustaining and it's absolutely essential for anybody who wants to long-term experience success. This needs to be built on a foundation of self-love, which is a very wiener dog message.
what does that have to do with dachshunds?
Nothing. It's just a funny term, wiener dog.
Oh,
He's like, we're gonna have a wiener dog. I don't know. It makes me laugh. It doesn't. There's not a literal connection,
got it.
but
Okay.
yeah,
No, that makes a lot of sense. And I think,
just a
most
corny
people are
pun.
are in podcasting for the love of it. So like you said,
I think so.
you created all of your shows, including Famous and Gravy, for 3.5 years before you got this industry deal, right? Before Wondery said, "Hey, be part of our network." So
Yeah.
I definitely think like you're not doing something for 3.5 years on your own dime because you know you're making money at it. If you're not making money at it, you're doing it because you love it. You're doing it because you're driven, because you're curious, because you're having a great time, because you're talking to great people and having amazing conversations, right?
And
So
let me tie it to the theme of your show on one more point, if I can, Norma.
please,
I think that people see that in you when it's coming from the inside out, when it's coming from the
yeah,
heart. And most of
yeah,
my work has been, I make some income from Famous and Gravy, but I make, I do far better with my clients and my partnerships. And that one of the things I really encourage people is to consider value in the broadest possible sense. Yes, there
yeah,
is direct monetization and what am I getting paid for my work? But there's also, am I building community? Am I networking with people? Am I, engaged in a creative passion that is attractive, that makes people,
mm.
want to hire me and get my help? And if that is true, deep inside, then I do think opportunity comes from that, and that's where the money in podcasting has been for me.
Absolutely. I talk about this in my personal life with a lot of my friends, actually, that enthusiasm and fun are underrated. I think that if you're having fun in life, like there is value to that. If something lights you up, there is value to that. If you have the energy to dive deep on a project, that has value. And I think that, in the capitalism economy that the world is now,
Yeah.
we put a lot of value on skills. We put a lot of value on experience, but we don't always put a lot of value on enthusiasm.
Mhm.
And so I think it's really important. And pod fade is real,
Yeah.
right? With PodBiz, I've talked about this a lot. Like we launched with 30 deep in the can
Yeah.
because I didn't want to feel like, oh my God, who do I have coming out in 2 weeks? And I've got to schedule this interview and I don't feel like it. And I've got all this work on and I've got to, client first always. And like, I didn't want that. And so I knew before I had the momentum of the launch, like when there was just a little bit of buzz and I was telling a couple of people about it, that I would want to line up people. I would want to have great conversations. And that has continued after our launch, of course.
Yeah.
But use the momentum you have. Use that natural gravity and momentum that you have to create things you love. And eventually, hopefully they will monetize, with feedback from audiences and a blind quiz, from, feedback from your audience and listener data, tweaking things and continuing to keep going and showing up. It will get you there. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Well, Michael, what's something that people don't know about what you do?
Oh God. I feel like I've captured my obsession pretty well in this conversation. What do they not know? I would say I think I spoke to this earlier, but I'll say it again. I think the joke I make sometimes is I got into podcasting because I like to talk, and much to my chagrin, I found out that the art of being a good host is about being a deep listener.
Oh, yeah.
So something I try to do is be very aware of new shows coming out and have real eclectic taste and draw inspiration from some really disparate sources. I try to listen to a lot of different formats, styles, concepts. And I want to know what's working for people. And even if I go back to Famous and Gravy, rewatchables meets You're Wrong About. I don't know how many people there are out there who love Michael Hobbs and Bill Simmons. Those seem like two very different creators to me, and I'm really proud of that eclectic taste. So it's a bit of advice, and it's something people may not know about me.
Yeah.
But now they do.
Well, gosh, let us know when we can subscribe to your list of listened to and recommended episodes. I think that would be really fun. And, we've had Alice Florence Orr on the show, and there just aren't enough podcast review industry outlets. So if you ever start one, I'm sure it'll be popular.
And hats off to Alice. I think she's amazing and one of the, one of the premier critics out there. She's been on the show. She was on Anthony Bourdain and Joan Didion.
Oh, yeah, she was. That was a fantastic episode. She's been on PodBiz. She is a fantastic addition to the podcasting industry. So shout out Alice. But and we'll have the link to her episode here in the show notes if you want. It's a really fun one. She actually talks more about getting your podcast featured. And reviewed. Yeah, it's really great.
I mean, in terms of the move the needle things, those feature requests and getting some attention from editors is huge. That's
absolutely. Absolutely. Well, Michael, I want to talk a little bit more about this indie to industry journey because, you've had 3 shows go in 3 very different directions, right? One with Smithsonian, which is a big nonprofit public institution. One with PRX, which I believe is also a nonprofit.
Yeah, actually, Smithsonian's interesting. There is a Smithsonian Institute and there's Smithsonian Magazine, and they're different, but they work together a lot. So we actually partnered with the for-profit Smithsonian Magazine arm. So, but it's sort of got like nonprofit vibes. So
profit Smithsonian, nonprofit PRX, and then profit Wondery, Amazon and all of that. So, what have you noticed in terms of the similarities of signing that deal?
I mean, I can tell you about what led into those conversations. A lot of it was understanding editorial priorities. What are these, distributors interested in? With Wondery, for example, they had at the time a very big priority on history. And our show is sort of pop culture meets history. So we kind of retooled things to emphasize, that category. With PRX, they were very interested in uh, more science and featuring, data science. I mean, a lot of their support came at the time from the Sloan Foundation, which
Yep.
supports a lot of science initiatives. And Smithsonian was interested in environmental content. So that was a big part of it. I think that, to go back to a previous point, they were looking for a different approach, a different, view into
Yeah.
things. Famous and Gravy is very much a twist on biography. It's subjective. No, biographers tend to look at legacy and impact on history, and we're asking a subjective question. Yeah, but what about meaning? What about, like, would you
Yeah.
want that life? Like, what would it have felt
Yeah.
like? It's an empathetic view. With my environmental show, it was a very sort of challenge the narratives in environmental storytelling. And with raw data, I mean, it was sort of like a lot of, science and tech meets industry, and how do we understand data as a kind of natural resource like oil? How does it get manipulated and used against us and monetized? There
Yeah.
was such a kind of big question there. So I think in all cases, it was creativity within category. At least I'd like to think that.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that, it's something where you found the right partner for each show. So for everybody out there who, you know, wants to be on a specific network, look at the other shows they have. Look at where you can creatively bring value. And
Totally.
then what are you excited to make, maybe without ever getting that
and
support?
and network your butt off. I
Oh,
mean,
yeah,
all of
100%.
those,
Yeah.
maybe that goes without saying, but all of those
Yeah,
collaborations happened because we struck up conversations and just said, I think we're worth knowing about. Do you want to pop on a Zoom or a phone call or whatever?
absolutely. Well, Michael, if you had to start over again today, what would you do differently to grow faster or smarter with both your
Hmm.
own shows and, how you support your clients?
That's a great question. We've talked a little bit about audience research. I was late to the party with really understanding how unbelievably important audience research is. I told you about this, kind of a hack or device I've been using to have focus group conversations with
Yeah.
famous and gravy audience. It was 15 years or 12 years or whatever of working in podcasting before I felt like I was ever having those one-on-one conversations. Um, my shows were successful. People were responding to it, but I had such a hard time being objective about why, what am I doing well and how can I do better? Because a lot of the difference between, a very good show and an excellent show is at the margins. And the only way you're gonna sort of add marginal benefit incrementally is by digging deep on how a show is being experienced. So I,
Yeah.
I, I think however you do it, whatever kind of, I don't know, guerrilla tactics or investment you need to make to get audience feedback, like,
Yeah.
get it. That
I
you cannot say that
absolutely
enough. Yeah,
Yeah, I absolutely agree. And I think, it's with a lot of work, you can make a good show. But to go from good to great really requires craft.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
And it
ultimately.
requires data and it requires real refinement. I mean, I've had the opportunity to work with and, on a mass scale with a lot of the work that I've done just to speak to people who create work, 20 people are touching an episode, sound designers and
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
creating custom auditory signatures. And I mean, the sky's the limit. And that's really, when it comes down to like client budget and things like that. But I mean, the craft of it can be just transcendental.
Yeah,
Um,
and I mean, I will say one thing I'm extraordinarily proud of with Famous and Gravy. I'm executing that show on a shoestring budget. I mean, I
yeah,
think that I've been really interested in the, I don't know, Michael Hobbs style shows of designed conversations, because I think that there are ways of introducing a tremendous amount of high production value with a lower budget, and I think it's about segmentation, it's about structure, it's about having a very clear why. And if those things are in place that draw out then you can make a high production show without breaking the budget. I do believe that's possible.
absolutely. Well, Michael, last question we ask everybody here on PodBiz. What are you most excited about coming up within the podcasting industry?
It's a good question. I do think that I'm an audio first person. kind of always have been, and I've decided I always will be. I don't mind being recorded necessarily, but I'm so much more comfortable if it's just sound and I'm not having my video recorded. I clam up in
Welcome
front
to
of the camera.
PodBiz.
I know. I clam up in front of the camera. And
No, you're doing great. You made it through. This is the last question.
Well, thank you. Phew. I think that there are a lot of perceived threats to audio storytellers like me, that the budget for narrative shows is not what it is, the market doesn't seem to be there, that YouTube has changed the game in terms of what a podcast is, that there's a lot of fear that audio is being sidelined. And not to mention threats of AI even. I am taking the opposite approach. I'm taking those threats or those fears and trying to look at them as a challenge to how can we make exceptional audio? And that's what I want to do. And I believe that there is enough creative energy and inspiration out there that we are going to see that. So I'm sort of looking forward in a silver lining kind of way to seeing how audio first creators respond to some of the forces right now, because I think there's always going to be a space for this. There's always going to be people who want to experience pure sound. And I think that we're going to make some really great stuff in the coming years.
Absolutely. Well, Dr. Michael Osborne, founder of 14th Street Studios and founder and host of the podcast Famous and Gravy, amongst others. Thank you for joining us here on PodBiz.
Such an honor. Thanks, Norma.